A very warm welcome to all of you joining us for this policy insight on diversity management and the benefits of intercultural inclusion management, discussion and diversity. What are our urban cities up to, both in the Euromed but across more widely, is the subject of our conversation this morning for 1 hour. We have a sterling panel of contributors, and we have an audience that's both on our Zoom but also live stream. Before I bring in our speakers, let me say a few words about the modes of engagement. Those of you who are on Zoom, it would be really helpful if you have your camera on. Make sure you're on mute, and ensure that if you wish to raise a question or raise a query, then please use your virtual hand. Your virtual hand you'll find by the icon of participants, in case you don't know, and use it there to raise your hand. And then we'll try and bring you, as many of you in, to have this very timely conversation. I also want to welcome our Zoom, our live stream audience. You are also included in this discussion. Obviously, very warm welcome to you. Those of you who on live stream who wish to raise a question, don't hesitate to put your questions online through hashtag FOE debate, and we will take your questions also. And that's it. That's in terms of the kind of modes of engagement. And I just urge you, all of you, that I know it's early in the morning, perhaps it's a bit later elsewhere, because we have an audience from Europe, but also the North Africa and Middle East. So we're covering a big region. A big regional factor here. So I'm welcoming all of you to participate as much as you can, and not to be bystanders and passive. It will be helpful because actually this debate is really at the core of how societies at a local level work, and how do we make sure that societies can work better in the context we find ourselves in. And the issue of urbanization and diversity management in cities is long-standing. Perhaps, I think, more recently, in the past 30 years, the issue has got the attention of policymakers more so. And what we do know is, at least in both, actually, in the Euromed area, but also Europe and the world more widely, urbanization has a history and a relationship with the wider issues around instability in the world, the patterns of migration and refugees. In any city you go to in the world, you'll know there will be a very different mix that reflects what's happened in history and in the world. And you'll see that actually most of our cities are very, very clearly delineated between those who've come in the past 100 years or 80 years or 60 years, 50 years of a certain colour, certain culture, certain religion, and they will be mostly occupied in poor accommodation, with very poor infrastructure, and will be placed in a situation where fending for yourselves is the order of the day. And then zoom forward to now, and suddenly we're having questions about why isn't diversity working? And we have to ask ourselves, who's responsible for that? And but actually, blame is not the order of the game here. It's about solutions and how we move forward, because there's a lot we can do, what we've learned to be able to do over time. So I'm going to start with one of our first panelists, and we've got a all-women panel, which I'm really pleased to note. And that's not just a kind of a phase statement. I mean it, because we know from neuroscience, women make better decisions and are better at negotiation discussion. I want to bring in Katarina from Eurocities. Katarina, you've been involved in, as I understand it, surveying cities most recently. And so what policies and best practices from your survey and your experience would you say lead to social cohesion within Euromed cities? Over to you, Katarina.
Thank you very much, Damendra. Also, big thank you to Friends of Europe for inviting me to this debate. And indeed, I would say that the key to your question is structural, inclusive, and sustainable integration policies that work towards equal opportunities for all inhabitants in the city. Now, for those of you that don't know us, Eurocities is the network of 190 big cities in 39 countries. And a lot of the work that we are doing with our members on the integration of migrants is done in the context of our mutual learning program, where cities come together and learn from each other's good practices. Another way through which we gather information on integration measures on the ground is our Integrating Cities Charter. And by signing the charter, cities commit to providing equal opportunities for all residents. And at Eurocities, we monitor this progress, as you have said, and actually have done so over the summer now. And I'm happy to share with you today some insights from this upcoming report about how cities foster social cohesion. And of course, there are different local contexts and cities all over Europe, but there are several overarching trends that arise out of cities' best practices. And I want to mention just 4 of them now. So first, cities are developing integration policies in a more structured and sustainable way. Following the increase in the arrivals of migrants and refugees in Europe in 2015 and 2016, and the first reception and integration efforts, cities have made key changes in their administrative structures, and they have expanded the scope of their integration strategies. Cities have also taken on increasing responsibility, sometimes also through changes in the national law, for the integration of newcomers. And they have established more systemic guidelines, plans, and models for integration. Now, very often, these also relate to a distinct city identity as an inclusive way of making newly arrived migrants part of the city's citizenry, which is then also written down in the respective integration strategies. Being able to see yourself as Amsterdamer, Milanese, Marmobor, or Utrechter already goes a very long way in creating a shared identity and setting the context for social cohesion. Second, cities mainstream integration across different policy areas as a way to respond to migrants' needs more holistically. What does that mean in practice? It means increased cooperation between different city departments, bringing together integration services, education, employment, social welfare, health, culture, and so on. And more, this is done by way of one-stop shops, where all services are brought together under one roof to facilitate the integration process. But cooperation also happens beyond the city administration and includes local stakeholders, such as civil society organizations, local employers, migrants associations, and so on. So mainstreaming integration in such a way, again, comes back to creating a holistic approach and is absolutely needed within the bigger picture of social cohesion. So having that comprehensive viewpoint of integration is important, but it also needs to go hand in hand with focusing on the specific integration needs of particular groups, which is my third point. Now, this applies especially to migrants that may be particularly vulnerable, and most cities have dedicated services for migrant children and youth, specifically also unaccompanied minors, migrant women, migrants with specific health needs, and also undocumented migrants. Now, this is done by way of tailor-made integration services, but also by an outspoken commitment to non-discrimination and anti-racism. And many cities have put in place plans and strategies to that end that are often based on an intersectional understanding of migrants' experiences of discrimination. A lot of cities also have dedicated offices for non-discrimination, for instance in Barcelona. And these structural contact points are important elements within the broader aims of fostering social cohesion. Now, together with creating these structures, cities are aware of the need to openly and publicly communicate about inclusiveness and equal opportunities, which is my fourth and final point for now. This shows the city's openness towards all their residents, and it also contributes to creating a climate for living together and foster social cohesion again. Now, there are many good examples of cities putting this into practice, from dedicated communication campaigns to involving their mayors in championing this cause, to engaging the public through intercultural events. And one good example here would also be Nicosia and Cyprus, but also to promoting social cohesion through specific radio shows or social media activities in very innovative ways. And here it's also very important, again, to take into account the role of culture in bringing people together. Now, of course, there are other transversal trends that we found in surveying our member cities, such as including migrants in developing integration strategies or making city administrations themselves more diverse as well. But I think I'll leave it here for now. We will publish the whole report on the 2nd and 3rd of December at our Integrating Cities conference, and you're all very welcome to join us then as well.
Thank you.
But for now, looking forward to the debate.
Catherine, thank you very much for that. That was very kind of very structured and very clear. I suppose one of the questions that was raised in my mind, this is not for necessarily for you to answer at this stage, but those of you in the Zoom audience live stream, please think about this. What you said or stated are the kind of structures and features, but it would be good to know what the impact is. How are people feeling about this on the ground? Is it working? Because if you think about the kind of narrative that the COVID crisis has created in terms of the impact on those who are on the sharp edge of inequality, it's only, I suppose, reinforced inequalities. And we know that systemic discrimination has only become much more forceful when we look at what's happened to black and ethnic minorities across Europe and the globe, but especially women as well. And it would be good to know whether these structural features that you've referred to are actually going to have an impact on the ground, and are they bottom up or are they top down? But something to think about, and we'll come back to that in that debate. I want to move on to the Council of Europe. We have Irene. Irene, welcome. Irene.
Sorry, yes, I have to unmute. Hello, everybody.
Hello. A warm welcome to you. Many. Hello, Irene.
Hello.
There's a bit of technical. We do. We had a technical hitch.
Yes.
Don't worry, it's on our side, but it's fine. You just heard what we've from Eurocities, and my point about impact. And many people have felt that migration policies have actually been a failure up to this point in the past few decades, if not longer. From your perspective, what does intercultural integration bring to the table of migration policies? And in that context, what are the tools you can make use of to improve trust? Because trust is one of the key issues in the debate about diversity management integration, but it's also about the sense of lack of confidence in each other, and cultural difference, religious difference also plays into that. But over to you, Irene.
Yes, as you said, the mantra in your introduction, the current challenges we're experiencing in relation to diversity and sense of belonging and trust are to a large extent due to past policy mistakes. Of course, we should be careful when we speak about mistakes, because every public policy progresses as an iterative process, as a constant chain of errors, learning improvements, or sometimes slidebacks. And this is in an endlessly changing context. So what I see as the biggest original sin of past integration policies is that they have focused to a large extent, whether by design or by default, on framing conditions for access to things like status in terms of residency or citizenship, access to rights and services. And while on the surface, integration was presented as a two-way process. You remember, for instance, the European Union common principles on integration and many other policy framework, they lip service to say that integration is a two-way street. But in practice, the onus has actually been always on migrants. And
Indeed.
There has hardly been any conscious effort to engage the host society as an active part of the process. In other words, I think the socio-psychological and identity factors, community relations, community cohesion, perceptions, attitudes, relationships, they were neglected. And yet, these are really widely responsible for making integration inclusive. And this is the gap that the intercultural integration approach actually filled. And I'm delighted that you have chosen to focus this event on that term, which is not yet very much used, as far as I'm aware. It's a structured process of developing that policy framework. We started doing it in the Council of Europe in 2008 with the Intercultural Cities program. And based on the results of that program, emerged a comprehensive and deeply operationalized policy concept with a set of indicators to measure progress. And it's now embraced by over 140 cities globally. A pan-European standard was adopted by the Council of Europe's 47 member states in 2015 on intercultural integration. So it became really a quite well conceptualized approach. And now we are actually working, and that's maybe a news for many of you, we are working on adapting the standard to the national level. So we're really trying to bring the intercultural inclusion, intercultural integration policy framework to the national level in a multi-level governance approach. Now you're asking, what are the keys? What are the tools? Now, at the heart of the intercultural integration concept is the need to create condition within host society to accept migration as a normal and largely beneficial phenomenon. There is a need for societies to understand the potential value of diversity that comes with cross-border migration, and even sometimes internal migration, actually. And the need for inclusion as a moral, political, and economic imperative. Above all, intercultural integration focuses on creating possibilities for incentives, for meaningful interactions in all areas of life. Now, interaction is really the core of intercultural inclusion. It happens in education, in enterprises, in public space, in arts and culture, in the neighborhoods. And it is the means of building trust and sense of belonging. In fact, it's not something that we have invented. It's based on the context theory in sociology, which, granted, is not necessarily accepted by everybody, but it's quite a strongly supported theory. Yes?
I was agreeing with you. It's not a strongly supported theory. Please do continue.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so I'm not going to be very long. So often intercultural, often the task of building trust and relationships is entrusted to grassroots organizations, and of course they have an extremely valuable role. But unless this is embedded in policies, in urban planning, in the way we deal with schools and neighborhood segregation, in the way we encourage diverse and inclusive decision-making bodies, inclusive bureaucracy, inclusive arts, inclusive sports, the effects of grassroots efforts will not be either far-reachable or sustainable. So the integration policy model asks public authorities to really take their responsibilities and focus on three things: equality and non-discrimination. That's obviously key, and there's many ways of doing that by making sure that the public administration is equitable, inclusive, and diverse, to embedding, in doing diversity and inclusion audits, and many, many other things. I have no time to go into detail.
Sure.
Second pillar, embracing diversity as an asset and learning to manage it competently. And this is through public discourse, through training and capacity building for intercultural competence of all officials and all public service professionals, educationists, professionals, etc. And finally, fostering meaningful contacts and interaction. And taken together, these three dimensions contribute to equality, to equity as well, inclusion and cohesion. The target of intercultural integration is society as a whole. And the message is that the migration and diversity, if managed in a competent way and constructive way, are a win-win. I'm finishing with last phrase. Several studies have shown, notably studies correlating Eurobarometer, the quality of life in European cities, and the Intercultural Cities Index, which is our benchmark. They have established, so these studies have established that cities which perform better according to the Intercultural Cities Index, in them citizens are more satisfied with the availability of jobs, the quality of services, the public administration, and with community cohesion. So we have some quite serious evidence that intercultural inclusion works. You were asking about evaluation impact. So intercultural integration is a key element of good governance in the end of the day. It's no longer a luxury or something that you want to experiment with. I think we have quite strong evidence that it's something that should be embraced by everyone.
Irene, absolutely, thank you. And but you know, you can imagine the language we're speaking in. If we had the populists in the room, can you see what fun they'd make of it? And actually think, my God, what are these people talking about when we've got issues around jobs? People are taking our jobs. We've got such paucity of resources, and you're talking about intercultural communication. And there's something about the language, but I agree with you. It's a step forward from what we've had before in terms of integration, which has always been a loaded term historically, where the incomer has to somehow divest themselves of any of their identity to integrate into some sort of norm. And the intercultural aspect obviously brings things together in a different way. What of schools? From my experience in the UK, and I'm not that conversant with continental Europe and the Euromed area, but schools can be the drivers and the anchors for that intercultural engagement if we do it right. But if you have populations of communities that are placed in certain housing where you have the poorest goals or overrepresented by minorities, I'm not sure how it works, but over to you. What's the role of schools, and how do we improve the role of schools to be the driver, the kind of anchor for this agenda?
But thank you for asking this question, because it makes us looking really into concrete things. Because as you're right, speaking at a very high level, it can sound very fluffy, very lofty, and very wishy-washy. So in fact, intercultural integration is something that touches upon really all the functioning systems in the cities. And schools are not a panacea, of course. They're often expected to do everything, but they can do quite a lot. So along with police, faith organizations, neighborhood groups, and everybody else, the schools have a role to play in terms of mixing and working towards desegregation. Of course, that's easier said than done, because as you know, segregation is, and you mentioned it in the beginning, segregation is the biggest reason why people distrust each other. They don't know each other, and it's easier for people who live separate lives to attack each other and hate each other and not to live in solidarity. So desegregation, physical and mental, is key. So first of all, you need to prevent school segregation. It's difficult because schools are attached to neighborhoods. And when neighborhoods are segregated and children go in their neighborhood schools, obviously that's what happens. Or otherwise, there's often white flight. People leave schools where there are more children of color or migrant children. And this is happening everywhere, and there are no magic solutions.
No.
But there are experiences, and I can give a couple of examples. One option that seems to really work well is to make poor and ethnically mixed neighborhood schools excellent and attractive. One example, a showcase example, is a campus Ruthli in Berlin, Neukölln. I don't know, maybe Katharina's heard about it. I think you're German. I think it's been quite of a showcase, really, and I don't have time to tell the story. But it's an example of how you can turn things around and make failing schools some of the best schools, and that work both for minorities and majorities alike. And they become vector of inclusion and belonging. Secondly, bringing schools of different confessions under one roof, as for instance has been done in Tilburg in the Netherlands. That's not magic either, because even under one roof, and I think Bosnia and Herzegovina has taught us a lesson, that could still be segregation under one roof. But then, of course, there are many things to do in the schoolyard or in the classrooms or in the teachers' rooms to make sure that the communication goes, and that there is some kind of empathy and working together. School twinnings been tried, for instance, in Stockholm, with neighborhood schools in poor neighborhoods and central Stockholm schools working together over a year to make kids develop empathy and intercultural understanding. Making parents full partners in the educational process through all kinds of things, inviting them via postcard rather than a letter to make it less intimidating, to offering gym classes for parents, as in one school in Swansea, which means that they cross that barrier that is scary, going into the school building and talking to the teachers. As you see, it's really often at the level of psychology and taking the person. Making school intercultural spaces by having diverse teaching staff. That's really, really important, because you need to give example and motivate students by role models. Or offering deeply multicultural environments and curriculum, as in the European School in Vienna, which teaches this in its primary curricula 20 languages to each pupil, making linguistic knowledge and competence really the basis of interculturalism. I can go on, but I think we can stop here.
Thank you. No, that's very specific. And what occurs to myself, but I'm sure many others, is that some of these things are just so simple, aren't they? They're about the basic sociology and psychology about how humans and communities get on, and yet we fail the trick or the test each time because of politics or discrimination or prejudice, unfortunately, and a sense of what a norm is. In many societies. I want to open it up to our audience. I'd like to get your reaction to what you've heard. You might have your own experience. You may wish to share your particular view on actually how things should work, or actually your experience of how things haven't worked also, and what we need to do to improve. But what we do know is that in the current circumstances that we find ourselves, where you've got the double whammy of a health crisis and an economic crisis, we know who's going to suffer the most. And we know where they're going to suffer the most in many of our urban centres. I want to open up. I think we have one already. We have Leah Achampong. Leah, your video is off.
Hi, yes, I'm not able to switch on my video at this moment. I hope that's okay.
That's okay. Just introduce yourself and your question.
Yes, this is me just in a personal capacity, but I did want to come in on some of the points. I very much was interested in hearing what you had to say, Elena, and I agree with what you said as well, Amendra, that some of these things are very simple points around interactions and human interactions. And coming back to what you said, Elena, I agree that there is often little effort, or sometimes it's just difficult to engage the host societies, as you phrased it. And I think you can see this very clearly when it comes to landlords and estate agents that choose to discriminate against third or fourth generation Europeans that have non-European names. And that's just that's one example. You also see it in terms of trying to get jobs, but also in terms of wanting to be engaged in civil society opportunities, for instance, getting onto the local park board or something like this. And so I'd be interested in understanding how to remove the barriers to engaging host societies in the integration process. I think you touched upon it when you were talking about schools, but as you say, schools are not panaceas for all of this work. So what sort of other options are there towards engaging host societies into this integration process?
Leah.
Yeah.
If you can hear me clearly there, I think we had a bit of a sound issue there. What's your it's on my side? What's your view? What do you think are some of the things we should? Because this is not a. We like to make sure that this is an engagement of all of you. We're not. It's not just a classic conference where you listen and pose questions to the speaker. It's about all of us joining in and contributing to this debate. What's your sense?
So I'm British, if you can tell from my accent.
Indeed.
As everyone knows, we're currently going through a Brexit situation, and when that took place, I very much felt like I didn't understand my country. So I'm ethnically from West Africa, but I'm a third generation British person, and so this is my country, which I love, and so Brexit was not a great time for me being here, but one of the things that helped in terms of understanding the different perspectives and views of people who chose to vote for Brexit was organising things like street parties. So having that level of engagement on a personal one-on-one basis really helped, and it helped me to understand what the concerns of people were who voted for Brexit, and they had very similar concerns that I had at a political level, but they were choosing to take it out on the European elections, sometimes because of the fact that they didn't have all of the information to fully engage.
Sure.
But I think that is one key point, is just simply organising these sorts of street parties events where you really get to speak to people. Another thing is that as a result, we ended up having things like monthly knitting circles, and that was people of all ages. And I found that helpful because for a lot of people in society, what the elders in their families and communities say resonates and has an impact on them. So if you're able to get older older people in society to be a part of this integration process. That then filters down to the younger people within a family structure, and it helps to ensure that moving forward there's this sort of recognition. Integration is something that it's a no-brainer. Essentially, it's something that makes sense. It comes back to this idea of human interaction. So I'd say that for my community, those were the two things that really helped, because post-Brexit I was witness to seeing the amount of hate that there was in the street. People felt very much emboldened to just shout things at me, to shout things at my family. And I even had yogurt and oranges thrown at me post Brexit as well. So
awful. I know. I've heard the stories. Yes, I come from the UK myself and grew up there, and I know what you mean. And it's amazing, isn't it? And I don't think it's just in the UK. The public narrative of who belongs and who does not is so enduring. You can be fourth generation, and you'll walk somewhere, walk into a situation, and someone will say, "So where are you from?" A proxy for you must not be from this country. And in that unconscious bias is so deeply ingrained, and we need to find ways in which actually future generations can have that sense of ease of presence on the streets and in their countries, that they feel completely at one, rather than having to, even if they've had grandfathers that came in the 1910 or 1920, still being posed the question about, do you belong? I want to ask others to contribute. I'd like to hear from our, this is a policy insight in partnership with the Alan Lynn Foundation, so we're very grateful to be working with them. I want to hear from those of you on the other shore. We have many people joining us from all over the Middle East, North Africa. Those of you are from there, please join. Give us your experience, because it's a different, a very different narrative. But I do want to bring in Mohammed. Mohammed, are you there? Mohammed Sadi, are you there? Okay. No, I think we've lost him. But if there's anyone else who'd like to. I can see some faces who are looking kind of like, shall I not? Don't hesitate. Please, don't be shy. So if there are no takers at the moment, I'll move on to our next contributor. And our next contributor is Eleonora, who is Head of Operations at Intercultural Research at the Alan Lynn Foundation. Welcome, Eleonora. Can you hear me? So, what in terms of focal points of socialization between and across Euromed region, what differences in integration do you see between European countries and MENA region?
Okay. First of all, well, I would like to give a very good morning to everybody that is participating in this big conversation. And I think that an activity and a big conversation like the one of today testify of our commitment from international organizations to young women and men, to civil society representatives and think tanks, to the promotion of dialogue. Today, in the midst of the pandemic, speaking of intercultural dialogue, that is also the mandate of the Alan Lynn Foundation, it might look like a luxury. But from our perspective, this is not a luxury. And actually, it is a need that has been expressed by all the civil society representatives we have consulted, and a large number of people that live in the societies of the region. And we have the evidence through our research, scientific research. So speaking of intercultural dialogue today is understood as speaking of a part of the solution for some of the pressing issues for our society. So intercultural dialogue is considered a tool for sustainable growth, a tool to also improve social cohesion, to give more opportunities also for job creation and youth development and exchange, for the empowerment of civil society. I think it is important that we state this at the very beginning, because otherwise it seems as if we are speaking of a realm that it is far from the needs and the basic needs of people. Actually, we are speaking today of something that it is important and can make a difference to the lives of people all around the Mediterranean. To answer your question, Demandra, of the differences north and south of the Mediterranean about the tools for integration and the points of socialization, I would like to share with you some data from our scientific research that aims to map trends in intercultural relations and also our experience of working with the largest network of civil society organizations.
Indeed, yes.
So I will
yeah.
Yes, we are lucky to have, let's say, this big network of organizations and people committed to this agenda, because we need to be many and all working together. So I will just share data from on 5 different questions areas. We spoke about diversity. When we ask people about their appreciation of cultural diversity, we see that North and South, with a discrepancy of 1 point percentage, we see that people consider cultural diversity as a source of prosperity for their society. So over 70% of respondents they consider diversity as an asset for also economic prosperity. And then we have 90% of Europeans and 80% of Southern and Eastern Mediterranean that are calling for equal rights and opportunities for people from different cultural and religious backgrounds. So we have here a social basis, let's say, also for the promotion of the policies we are talking about, that Irena and also Caterina mentioned. On the other hand, when we ask people what can be effective tools also to live better in multicultural societies, as number 1 priority emerges education. Also, you tackle this issue with Irena. And the schools are seen as the first socialization point by over 80% of people north and south of the Mediterranean. Then we striking importance also given to the organization of multicultural events, artistic events. As also the speaker from the audience took the floor, this can be a starting point to facilitate interaction between the different groups, also by events that can be pleasant. And then this is an important starting point to allow direct interaction among people. And finally, we see that 77% of Europeans and 81% of Southern and Eastern Mediterranean consider that it is very important to allow the expression of cultural diversity in the public space. So cultural diversity, religious diversity shouldn't just pertain the private sphere, shouldn't be limited in the public space. And then also to answer your question about the main methods of interaction that we have registered. We see that Europeans mainly interact within the neighborhood and the public space and through work, while Southern and Eastern Mediterranean mainly through the internet. And if I can share now, if I can anticipate also the data from our latest survey that we carried out in this year, so in the midst of the pandemic, still the internet is gaining a much more importance, especially in the Southern and Eastern Mediterranean, and despite the limitations to mobility among Europeans that we all knew, the neighborhood is still seen as the main space for social interaction. Finally, dialogue and dialogue measures are seen as very effective tools also for the prevention of cultural divides and conflicts and radicalization in society. Among these dialogue measures, we see that education programs, youth-led initiatives, and then youth participation in public life are seen as the tools to facilitate and to prevent, actually, potential radicalization and the conflict within society. So I just wanted to give you this brief overview of differences in North and South, but also this common basis that we have when we speak about intercultural policies, that it is actually from the voice of the people. So we are talking to citizens at large from the Euromed region.
No, it's good to have that reinforced, because actually when you think about many of our cities in the Euromed area, you know that diversity is both its economic driver, but it's also its cultural driver, and it's a these cities are much more attractive. People enjoy those spaces more, and we know that's ever thus. And also that point about interaction. We know that the internet has become the new public space for interaction in different ways, for good and bad, and it's only going to be increased in terms of what we find ourselves in terms of the health and economic crisis. That the web, the internet, and digitalization are now going to be the new norms of interaction, consuming, and a whole range of other things, and keeping in touch with family even. So we know that those are here to stay for the moment. But if I may, if you can be brief in your response, because I want to bring in some of our audience who have now prepared to engage in questions. What about the role of cities from your perspective? Because we've heard earlier from Eurocities, and we've heard from Irena about the fact that this is not simply about events. This is about systemic intercultural operations, where it's about who's in politics, who's employed, the kind of structures that are put in place. What's the role of cities, and I suppose what's the role of cities and yourselves as a foundation in moving this agenda forward?
Well, we heard what are the main tools for socialization. So the public space is a central space for this socialization. And municipalities, they have a role that they can play to support artists, civil society, educators in the formal and informal sector. But again, as it was said, it is important to make this approach systemic. So it is important to embed policies and funding mechanisms that can take the individual initiatives to a sustainable policy and sustainable approach for integration and for permanent dialogue. So cities can facilitate the creation of these mechanisms to bring around the table different actors that are all committed to the promotion of this agenda, and can give them the tools to implement, let's say, these actions. And on the other hand, they can make the public space a space for structured intercultural interaction. So when we were speaking about these public intercultural or multicultural events, this should become, let's say, a priority also in the agenda of local authorities. And then just going to foundations such as ours, like international organization, I think we need to work at 4 different levels. One, it is about advocacy and research. So to continue working at the international, national, and local level to push for this agenda and to give evidence, scientific evidence on the importance and the benefits from the promotion of this agenda. We need to work for skills development and capacity building for intercultural learning and citizenship. So we work with the multipliers that then again need to be supported for the continuation and multiplication of their efforts. We need to work with the civil society, and for this we make available resources, different funding schemes that can help civil society also to work with the schools, for example, to work with municipalities, and for the organization of all these activities at the local level. And finally, we need to support young people for international exchange, but also for participation within their societies. So I think these are the ingredients to try to make this agenda sustainable.
Indeed, and I suppose what keeps on, thank you, Eleanor, but one thing that keeps on occurring to me, and I'd be interested in what happens to your conference later, Katarina, in terms of integration and the agenda, but that thing about what works, what do we understand to have worked from a citizen community perspective, so that I know it's intensely difficult, but it would be really good to know that we have an evidence base or a compelling business case, which sounds dreadful, I know, but that's the only way to get some governments and others to play in this space, to say, actually, this works, it makes economic sense, cultural, political, and social sense. So any views on that? I want to bring in Zainab. Zainab, Sidan? Are you there?
Yeah, hello.
Hello.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. Only I have one question, because I've been working with refugees in resettlement.
Whereabouts are you, Zainab? Just to say.
I'm from Egypt.
Yeah.
I'm from Egypt.
Okay.
Yes, but I have a question, because I've worked with refugees in resettlement units at the UNHCR here in Egypt as an interpreter. what I have seen, just like their own views, or the first thing when they hear about integration, is that they cannot divide between integration and assimilation. Um, so when the first thing they are asked about what how you react, or how can you put your kids, for example, to understand how society, or how a new society think differently than the one they grow up. And most of the parents, for example, are illiterate or have no idea about different cultures or diverse cultures, or how their kids, for example, can grow up in a different society. So what they ask all the time, or they worry that is that going to affect our local cultures or our beliefs that we grow up, or for example, our religion. So what they say is that only we will send our kids to language classes and work integration, for example, to understand how society operates. Otherwise, that we cannot accept that our kids, for example, get in touch with different beliefs that would affect what they have grown up. So is there any mechanism, as mentioned from other speakers now, they're trying to work on citizens and communities of the receiving society. Is there any possibility that can be, for example, a pre-departure orientation session, for example, for these parents or for these families who are about to be resettled in different countries, just to give them a clear vision of what integration is, or what society they are going to immigrate?
No, sure, and you make a very good point, Zanab. Is that, and it's not a new point either. It's been ever thus. I mean, as someone who came to the UK as a child and from Africa, and I know that many other communities that I was part of, there was this sense that assimilation, integration were felt like dirty words. You feel as if you're having to give up your identity in order to fit in. And that narrative hasn't changed a lot, especially when we know that at least it continues that populist politicians and others will still talk about a national identity that's very, very exclusive of others. But let's see what some of our other people say. Driss, thank you very much for your comment. Driss Chukri? Your video's off. Driss, are you there? You're on mute. Hello.
Okay.
Hi,
Okay.
do introduce yourself. Where are you, Driss?
I am Driss Shukri from Mazagan Institute from Morocco, Mazagan Institute for International Studies, and I am an international consultant in research, especially or specifically, I am doing focus groups all over the MENA region. So, like I have listened to many of the speakers, and this is very interesting, the ideas that they are coming with. But I would like to shed light on something, is the difference between, like the cities in the other side of the world and the cities in our side, in the MENA region. They have a different structure, a different, composition. It's not the same. So what applies in Europe, for example, not necessarily will be applied here in the region where we are. So I would join Eleonora for what she said in research, because this is the main thing we need to do in order to find cohesion and inclusion in the cities, as we are talking about here. So, first of all, we don't need to talk about the political decision. Is there a political decision first in order to imply or to bring this inclusion into the cities? Are the people who are taking decision aware of the importance of this cohesion in the cities for the development and for the well-being of the people? That's very interesting first. And then we need to do as much research as possible in order to understand exactly how the host communities are perceiving the immigrants, and how the immigrants are perceiving the local communities or the hosting communities. And then all of these things need to be done in order to, at least to put a finger on where we need to do the action, the next action. So I'm speaking here from a research perspective, but I am, really sure that this is one of the ways in which we can get into what we are looking for. And thank you for.
No, thank you for your contribution and bringing in that fresh insight, which is very, very helpful. Much appreciated. And obviously, the point is that actually, on either side of the shore, the issue of culture, history, and politics plays its part in terms of this particular agenda. We cannot assume it's going to be one and the same thing. But thank you for your comment and your notion. I want to go back to our panel for a moment, and as I know that Wallace, you've been waiting patiently to come in, and I want to bring you in. Wallace, welcome to this debate. So, Wallace, from your perspective, what is the role of cities in promoting social inclusion, but how can this be supported by cohesion policy funds?
Okay, good morning to all participants to this seminar. I would like first of all to start by thanking Friends of Europe for the invitation today. And I would add on a personal note that it's a real pleasure to cooperate with the Anna Lindh Foundation, as I had the honor of working with Anna in the past. And as Commission representative, of course, I particularly welcome the opportunity to have this dialogue with fellow esteemed panelists and audience about the benefits of intercultural integration at the local level. Well, as you may know, cohesion policy, the European Union cohesion policy, remains our foremost investment framework to support regional and local authorities to establish sustainable development strategies adapted to their needs, including with regards to social inclusion at the local level, urban and/or territorial. At that point, I would like to remind you that actually sustainability goes hand in hand with resilience and plays a fundamental role in reducing disparities and providing actual access to equal opportunities and non-discrimination. All of you in the audience, I guess, have heard about the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Development. Now, at the European Union level, under the overarching objective of sustainable urban development and urban earmarking of 5% of the European Regional Development Fund in the current programming period, we actually, with this same European Regional Development Fund, ERDF, provide support for investment in several areas of social cohesion in cities, addressing in particular inequalities and fostering inclusion at the local level, including the long-term integration of people with a migrant background, the long-term integration of people with disabilities through deinstitutionalization and community-based services, and the integration of marginalized communities. When it comes to sustainable urban development, cohesion funds are also, or I should perhaps say notably, available in the scope in particular of the regeneration of deprived urban areas. Although this may not directly affect incomes, action on this front can substantially improve access to services, to employment, to schooling and education, to housing, while improving safety and integration without further segregation. And these actions were also trying to mitigate the negative impacts of gentrifications. Integrated measures in this respect, when it comes to the regeneration of deprived neighborhoods, can also include actions to improve public spaces and green infrastructure, to promote mixed neighborhoods, or to improve accessibility of jobs and services available in other parts of the city or surrounding territory. And with the support of cohesion policies, our European cities can also facilitate the construction of more affordable housing to reduce housing costs and crowding, and thus also contributing to a lower level of urban poverty. Indeed, high housing costs may contribute to more people living in informal housing or even in the streets.
Sure.
So our member states have also allocated the European Regional Development Fund support in education to support schools together with kindergarten, creche, and other educational facilities. And in the current programming period, these supports for educational facilities amount to not less than 7 billion euros of ERDF investment. And definitely, as one of the speakers said, inclusive education is our priority, in particular addressing the needs of vulnerable groups such as Roma, people with disabilities, children, people with a migrant background, and so forth.
Okay.
And we have learned a lot, of course, through our recent experience in the past years. And we consider that for the next round of cohesion policy to come, 21-27, we should reinforce measures tackling educational and spatial segregation as part of our sustainable urban development strategies.
That's
And
good to know.
Sorry?
That's very good to know. I need you to conclude, but I think that's a very good point to conclude on, in terms of the fact that you're looking at this issue of education and segregation as a part of the new frontier of funding. I think that's going to be really effective, both for communities on the ground, but the education systems and others. I want to bring in a couple of people who have been very, very patient, because we've only got 5 minutes or so left. But thank you, Wallace, for that, because I know that you had to step in at short notice for the panelists that was due to be here. So thank you for providing that information, and it's very helpful. But can I also say to all those of you, as we've only got 5 minutes left or so, and I should have mentioned this earlier, use the Zoom chat to actually note your questions and issues, and we'll make sure that if there's a question that hasn't been answered, we'll try and make sure that the speakers are able to respond to you directly on the Zoom chat. So as we run out, please do log your questions on the Zoom chat so that we can record it, but it's also there for posterity, so we can make use of it for our report. I want to go to Asim Gueri. Hello.
It's good to having me. My name is Asim Gueri. I am from Jordan, and I'm participating in Young Mediterranean Voices. And previously, I was work with Young Arab Voices.
Okay.
I would like to give a simple comment about the role and the city diversity. It's all about the autonomy for me. For example, schools, municipalities, hospitals. Can schools have the ability to decide which curriculum which suit them, especially in the intercultural level? This is number one. Number two, can the schools hire teachers which have the profession to identify the cultural communities' identity clearly? This is number two. Number three, about the municipality. Municipality, unfortunately, it always provide services, but not in a justifying and equal level, which makes a lot of challenges for those who working in municipalities. For example, if there is a refugee in your city or in your town or in your county, there is no level of political participation. Let's say if you would like to vote for the municipality to provide you services in the elections, it gives you more power, more autonomy in your local communities, and makes people more attention to you. This is number three. Number four, it's about the healthcare. Every hospital, in my perspective, should have a community inside it dedicated to help its people, which is living around it. I know that the healthcare providing should be without any discrimination, but unfortunately, if citizens did not have the chance, neither the refugee, to have the more access, especially in my country, Jordan, it makes a lot of a pressure for those kinds of efforts. So I will support to give more autonomy to schools, to municipalities, hospitals, to get the ability to identify themselves clearly and to highlight the divine of the cultural perspective inside each town or city.
Okay, Asim, that's a very interesting point of view. I understand where you're coming from, but we know within communities also there are differences. And what we know is that discrimination is endemic in society. So our institutions reflect that discrimination in different ways. So there isn't an institution that's not if you like, with some prejudice, with systemic racism or inequality in it, because they reflect society more broadly. But the question for you will be actually, what would happen if you did have that greater autonomy? Would it necessarily help the promotion of shared values, norms, and behaviours, or not, which is controversial. And you can see what was the comments made by Macron last week in the context of the awful situation we find ourselves in with regard to the teacher and the spewing out of some deep cultural divisions and sense of community and what national identity is about. So it will be interesting to get other people's views on that point. It's coming. It's now 11, and we really. I'll just spend a couple of more minutes with you, if I may, if I can crave your indulgence, as they say in the legal profession. If I can crave your indulgence for another couple of minutes, that would be helpful. Because I want to turn to Burak. Burak? You're on mute.
Hi.
Hello. Very warm welcome. I know you, obviously, you are a regular and a friend of the house, but introduce yourself to others on the Zoom audience.
I'm from Germany, and I'm an alumni of the Young Mediterranean Voices program. I want to say a few facts for Germany regarding the Bertelsmann Foundation's report last year. It said that Germany needs 260,000 new workforce to bridge the gap in the labor market. And if you consider this dimension, we can see that there will be a huge migration to cities. And I want to ask, how can we deal with the migrants in the periphery of the cities to integrate them in the local decision making, to solve the local problems? I think in the chat box there was a link for having experts in advisory councils of the cities, but are there concrete examples of solving local problems, especially in capital cities like Paris, Berlin, London, of radicalization, of marginalization, and how are these migrants used to solve the problem in a different way, which would be less costly for the local decision makers?
Burak, from your point of view, what have you seen this happen successfully? And how should it happen? How should it happen?
Well, I think it's happening on a rolling basis on big cities, but it's not really in a way where you solve problems, because many times migrants are seen as the source of the problem, but not as the source of the solution. So it takes a long time to integrate them in the decision making, because they are excluded and they have to fight and work more to get into these positions. So there is a structural issue especially also in cities, that these people have to do more to be accepted, recognized, and be included. So
sure.
I speak of Paris, for example. I think there is a need for an intra-city dialogue among the banlieues and the city itself, because this would solve many problems and it would give a chance for especially young people in the outskirts, in the peripheries, to be listened and to be seen as French citizens, or to be seen as part of the solution.
Absolutely.
Would prevent many problems, especially the horrific incident last week in France.
Yeah,
I think it would be a good measure to tackle this problem from the ground. I mean,
completely agree with you, Burak, and I also don't think that's specific to this issue. I think there's a governance issue crisis across Europe and wider in terms of how communities and citizens actually are engaged in problem solving and co-producing solutions. And I think one of my experience, if I share it as someone who's worked in race relations in the UK and was head of the Commission for Racial Equality for some time, one of my absolute frustrations was the role of the community leader. I often, even when I reflect on it, I see it as being the easiest laziest way in which actually people were made into gatekeepers and were seen as the voice of a whole community, because it was easy. It made you feel as if you've done your job and felt that actually you had access, when in fact actually what you didn't do was reach into the heart of communities. And that concept of a community leader is quite ingrained, and I don't think we've moved beyond it, but it can be, I think, a very dangerous approach, because what you end up doing is you end up not listening and engaging with communities on the ground. Iman Al-Karadi. Hello, warm welcome to you.
Hello.
Where are you?
Hello.
Hi, where are you?
So I'm Iman. Yeah, here I am. So I'm Iman Karawi from Morocco.
Are you in Morocco? Great.
Yes. And I want to share with you this experience that we have here in Morocco. So for the past few years, we've had a lot of sub-Saharan Africans coming to Morocco, and there's just been, how to call it, an enormous amount of racism.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, coming from a country that's been colonized, a country who has felt Islamophobia, but still there is a lot of racism, and I think a lot of it comes from there is no understanding, there is no effort to understand the two cultures, while there is actually a lot of similarities between the cultures, and but I feel like it's changing, so that's a good thing. Again, for the past few years, we've had sub-Saharan students come into Moroccan universities. And, as you know, schools and universities are different from people you just see in the streets. So
Yes.
you have sub-Saharan African in your schools, you need to talk to them, you need to interact. You come to understand that we're all similar at the end. And I feel like it's just very sad that there is no effort to understand each other, to communicate with each other from both parties, actually. And yeah, so I feel like that's the biggest problem here in Morocco. And I feel like a lot of people, again, both parties feel like it's all just temporary, so they're just gonna come back to their country, or maybe they're just gonna, go to Europe. But I feel like this is really not something that's not going to happen. We will have to eventually, live with each other and connect with each other and understand each other.
Iman, before you go, if I can,
Yes.
do you feel things are changing for your generation? Do you think that the internet and the kind of cultural habits you form in through the internet and elsewhere in the connections you make is changing that dynamic? Because I'm so pleased that you brought in that freshness of approach, that actually it's everywhere. And identity politics is one of the biggest issues for us in the globe, and we pay very little attention to it and do not understand its economic, social and political value in terms of creating stability across the world. But do you feel that it's changing for your generation?
Absolutely. I think Americanization, McDonaldization, all those things can be seen as bad. But in terms of, understanding each other, I think it has changed a lot. The way I see, sub-Saharan Africans is not the same way my parents see them.
Indeed.
For me, just see them as other people. We're all the same. And, media has also changed the way we perceive each other. Again, very important point. I think there's been a lot of media inclusion for African Americans, a lot of media inclusion for Latinas, but for Arabs and Muslims, we're still waiting for this, media, for us to stop being terrorists and become something more than that.
Indeed.
So in the end, I think, yeah. So yeah, TV has helped a lot.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Because that was my sense, but I wanted to hear it from you, because I get a sense that, when we think about our consumption of what happens in the world and in our locality, it is so global, and there are these shattering moments of Black Lives Matters or the #MeToo campaigns, etc., which shift the dial just a little bit on how we perceive each other, and suddenly we have a wake-up call that we need to interact differently. But your generation, I feel, has a very different sense because of, as you referred to, that when you look at the different cultural anchors and institutions that your generation will revolve around, have a very different habit of how you see others And I think that we need to have that sense better. Colleagues, I'm run out of time, dramatically so. It's nearly 10 past, just 10 past 11. So I'm so sorry. I want to thank all our contributors. I want you to, if you can, continue the chat. We Friends of Europe and Anna Lindh Foundation will continue this discussion, this debate. It's not going to go away. It's ingrained. I suppose it's part of the DNA of how society works, and we mustn't lose sight of that. And we need to move beyond the original sin, as Irena, you mentioned, that at some point we need to learn the lessons of not viewing our policy development in this space through received wisdom. We need to break the mold of actually understanding that in the modern world that we live in, that diversity matters, inclusion matters, and identity politics are really going to be much more important in the future. When you think about migratory patterns over the next 20 years, when we look at the role of urbanization over the world, and especially in Europe and Africa, this subject isn't going to go away. It's only going to become much more either heated if we don't do something about it, or actually we can learn from those mistakes, and hopefully policymakers, politicians will do the right thing. Let's hope. But what I do know from experience, and you know this from experience actually, that and it was good to have Iman say what she said. There's a generation growing up, especially behind us, as people of my age and those in their 40s and 30s. There's a generation growing up that's seeing the world very differently. And my hope is that that we don't have to leave it to them to change their circumstances, that we will also do the right thing. Thank you all very much for your time, your energy, commitment. And I'm sorry that we've not taken all your answers, but I hope that you can use the chat. We're going to leave the chat on to share your ideas. And as I said, we will come back to you and scoop some of this up. And if you're interested, those of you who are online, if you want to have an engaged debate around this topic, more so, get in touch. Get in touch with us and the Anna Lindh Foundation, and we'll see what we can do in the new year. Because I think this issue of identity and identity politics, as I said, is not going to go away. I think it's going to become deeper and sharper and become a new fault line, modern 21st century fault line for how we live our lives in the future. Thank you all very much for participating, both on Zoom and live stream. You are the reason why these things happen, so thank you very much. Be safe, mind your distance, and take care, and see you again very soon. Bye-bye.